There's a brutal truth no one wants you to know. You're not lazy, you're fragmented. That constant guilt, the endless loop of broken promises, isn't weakness. It's a silent symptom of something deeper. Carl Jung warned us that the most dangerous enemy we face is not outside but within, the self we abandoned. Discipline was never meant to be a productivity hack. It's the sacred reunion of who you pretend to be with who you were born to become. But to reach that place, you must do something terrifying. You must grieve. You must bury the version of yourself who protected you, but also held you back. Only then can you reclaim your power and finally become whole. If you're tired of sabotaging your own potential, stay with me, because by the end of this video, discipline will no longer feel like punishment. It will feel like liberation. It's time you discovered why your identity keeps resisting structure and how integrating your inner shadow can transform your daily chaos into clarity. If you resonate deeply with this, don't forget to like and subscribe. This channel is your guide home. There's a version of you that wakes up every day with guilt in his chest and fog in his mind, not because he's lazy, but because something in him is broken and no one ever taught him how to name it. Society keeps calling it lack of willpower, but what if the real wound isn't in your effort, it's in your soul? What if soul fragmentation is the real reason you can't stay consistent? Carl Jung once said that what we repress doesn't vanish, it festers in the dark. And that's exactly what's happening. Every promise you break to yourself, every plan you abandon becomes another crack in your identity. It's not weakness, it's spiritual erosion. And if you don't heal it at the root, no amount of motivation will ever be enough. We live in a world that shames inconsistency, but never dares to ask why it happens. Why you sabotage your progress the second it starts to work. Why you feel the strongest urge to quit right after taking the first serious step. The truth? You are not battling laziness, you are battling a split identity. The part of you that wants discipline has been exiled, pushed into the shadow because it represents risk, hope, responsibility. And if you've been hurt in those areas before, your subconscious will do anything to protect you, including destroying your own momentum. This is spiritual self-sabotage masquerading as procrastination. You're not undisciplined, you're wounded. And it's time to stop punishing yourself for survival patterns you never consciously chose. If you grew up in an environment where effort went unnoticed or discipline was mocked, you likely internalized a dangerous message. That following through makes you vulnerable. That consistency leads to criticism, and so a defense mechanism was born, one where you start things but never finish them. You dream but don't act. You plan but don't execute. Because some part of you is still terrified that trying again will just prove you're not good enough, and that fear gets mistaken for laziness. No, this is not laziness. This is a shadow integration problem, a soul caught between who it longs to become and who it had to be to survive. Carl Jung believed that when we abandon parts of ourselves, those parts don't just disappear, they become the shadow. The more powerful the part, the more dangerous its rejection becomes. Your ability to stay focused, to be relentless, to lead yourself, that's not gone, it's buried. And every time you set a goal and don't follow through, you are not failing. You are refracturing the self. That's why it hurts so much. Not because of productivity, but because of identity. This is what emotional discipline really means. Becoming whole enough to be consistent, not by force, but by integration. And the longer you ignore that internal fracture, the deeper it gets. Think about how many times you've said, "I'll start tomorrow." Not because you didn't want change, but because you didn't feel worthy of it. You feared the cost of rising, the loneliness, the responsibility, the transformation. That fear is normal, but what you don't see is how much it's costing you every day. The fatigue you feel isn't from working too hard, it's from living with a constant contradiction. You know you're capable of more, but you keep performing less. That internal gap between knowing and doing is where soul fragmentation thrives, and the only way to close it is not by doing more, but by becoming more. Becoming more means no longer rejecting the part of you that wants structure, power, and control. That part is not your enemy, it's your blueprint, your compass, your inner king archetype, and the longer you suppress him, the more your life feels chaotic. Because when the king is exiled, the kingdom collapses. That's why your habits don't stick. That's why you can't focus. That's why your goals feel heavy before they even begin. Discipline isn't missing, it's imprisoned, and your first task isn't to force it back, it's to set it free. That starts with accepting that this battle has never been about effort. It's been about identity all along. Most people never escape this loop because they keep treating their symptoms instead of their source. They download apps, watch motivational videos, read atomic productivity hacks, but they never ask, who do I believe I am underneath it all? You can't build discipline on top of self-contempt. You can't commit to a future that you secretly believe you'll ruin. The work starts with restoring your belief in your own power. This is not a quick fix. This is a self-reinvention journey, and it begins by telling the truth. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're divided. And now it's time to come back home. So here's the invitation. Stop treating discipline like a behavior and start seeing it as the evidence of wholeness, because once you become whole, consistency becomes a side effect. You won't need to chase routines or hack your mornings. You'll simply act in alignment with who you are. But first, you must face the truth behind why you lost that connection. Because if discipline is the symptom of integration, then the root of your inconsistency is still hidden underground. And that's exactly where we're going next. But before we descend, check the first comment below. I've gathered tools that will help you begin this return. Now tell me, what part of you have you been running from? Let me know in the comments. You've been lied to. Discipline was never about waking up at 5 a.m. or drinking celery juice. It's not about productivity apps, color-coded planners, or performance hacks. Those are tools, not the truth. Real discipline is spiritual. It begins the moment a man decides he will no longer betray himself. Carl Jung didn't speak of habit trackers. He spoke of the self becoming whole. And in that wholeness, a rhythm is born, a devotion, a code. When discipline becomes sacred, it's no longer something you do, it's someone you are. And from that place, everything changes. You stop negotiating with time. You stop pleading with willpower. You start walking like a man who made a vow to himself and kept it. This is where the identity transformation truly begins. You start replacing the phrase, "I need to be more disciplined," with "This is just who I am now." It's subtle, but powerful. Most men think change starts with effort. But Jung would tell you it starts with meaning. If you don't believe your actions matter, if you think no one is watching, not even your own soul, you'll fall back into chaos the moment it gets hard. Discipline without spiritual grounding is fragile. It breaks under pressure. But when it comes from a place of inner reverence, it becomes emotional discipline, rooted, steady, unstoppable. Not because it avoids failure, but because it no longer fears it. Picture this, a man who trains every morning. Not because he's chasing an ideal, but because he's honoring a promise. A man who eats clean, not for abs, but for energy, for integrity, for alignment. This is not the language of hustle. This is the language of ritual. You can feel the difference. Hustle is noise, ritual is quiet power. One is loud, desperate, always searching for proof. The other is silent, committed, and sovereign. That's the man you're meant to be. And that kind of man doesn't chase productivity. He organizes his life as a sacred rhythm, echoing the internal order he has restored. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the integration of all parts of the self into one coherent whole. And discipline is how that wholeness expresses itself in time. When your psyche is fractured, your schedule is too. You resist order because it reminds you of what you've failed to become. But once you reintegrate the exiled parts of yourself, structure stops feeling like a cage. It becomes your armor, your compass, your way of saying, "I know who I am, and I know where I'm going." This isn't just discipline, it's shadow integration. And it's the only kind that lasts. You were never meant to grind your way into greatness. You were meant to reclaim your power and channel it with clarity. That's the deeper work. That's the part no one teaches. Because true discipline threatens every lie you've been told. It exposes the myth that you need another course, another system, another mentor. No, you need to become your own guide, your own source of direction. That's what it means to awaken the inner king archetype. He doesn't scream, he doesn't chase, he doesn't beg for permission, he simply leads. And he leads by example, through order, through consistency, through presence. Ask yourself honestly, who benefits when you believe that discipline is about external validation? Who profits from you staying addicted to performance and burnout? It's not you. The system wants obedient workers, not sovereign men. But a man who is spiritually disciplined is dangerous. He can't be manipulated by urgency. He doesn't need approval. He doesn't live in reaction. He creates his world on his terms. That's why real discipline is rare, and why it's so feared. Because it's not just a habit, it's a declaration. I remember who I am, and no algorithm, no distraction, no excuse can take that away. That's why you must stop trying to feel ready. Discipline isn't something that shows up when conditions are perfect. It's something you embody when you realize they never will be. You will still feel tired, you will still face doubt. But the disciplined man acts anyway, not because it's easy, but because it's sacred. He walks in silence while the world screams. He chooses presence over pleasure, structure over chaos, not because he wants to impress anyone, but because he refuses to abandon himself again. That's the power of a man who lives by spiritual self-discipline. And once you taste that power, you never go back. So now the question becomes, if discipline is this deep, this sacred, then why do we resist it so much? Why do we sabotage it the moment it starts working? What hidden story lives beneath our hesitation? We've touched the structure. Now we must touch the wound. Because underneath every failed routine is a deeper fear. A fear planted long ago. One that still whispers, even now, when you try to rise. And in the next chapter, we'll confront it. Not to be afraid of it, but to finally understand it. If you haven't yet, check the first comment below. I've shared something there that can anchor your ritual. And tell me in the comments, what are you ready to make sacred? Every transformation begins with a death, but no one tells you that. They talk about new habits, better routines, stronger mindsets, but they skip the funeral. They skip the part where you have to bury the version of yourself that kept you alive, but also kept you small. That's the hardest part of the self-reinvention journey. Not starting something new, but letting go of who you had to become just to survive. The man who broke his promises, who lived behind someday, who numbed the ache with distraction. He wasn't a failure. He was a protector. But now, his job is done. And if you don't grieve him consciously, you'll keep wearing his mask. Carl Jung understood this better than anyone. He taught that real change isn't about becoming someone else. It's about reclaiming who you were before the world taught you to forget. And to do that, you must face the moment where you stopped trusting yourself. Maybe it was a betrayal, a humiliation, a moment where your effort was mocked, your excitement silenced. From that point on, you began performing safety instead of living truth. And that performance became your identity. But now you're waking up. Now you're remembering. And that memory comes with pain, with tears, with silence. That is not weakness. That is resurrection. You can't build something sacred on top of self-contempt. You must forgive yourself first. For the days you wasted. For the potential you abandoned. For the hunger you buried just to be accepted. This is the part where most men give up, because grief feels too heavy. But grief is not the enemy. Avoiding it is. Every time you suppress the pain of who you didn't become, you also suppress the fire of who you still could. That's the paradox. The part of you that holds the most shame also holds the most power. And if you want to reclaim your power, you have to go there, back into the silence, back into the wound. Most men try to skip this step. They want rebirth without the death, structure without the grief. But that's not how identity works. You cannot become the disciplined man if you are still clinging to the survival version of yourself. That version doesn't need to be hated. He needs to be honored. You survived with him. You learned with him. He carried you here. But now, it's your turn to carry him to the grave of your past. Not with judgment, with gratitude. That is the only way the identity transformation becomes real. Through the sacred ritual of letting go, you finally create space for someone new to rise. And the man who rises is quiet. He doesn't announce his return. He simply begins again, slowly, intentionally, with rhythm. He wakes before the world, not to grind, but to remember what matters, to remember what he swore to himself when he was still dreaming. This man doesn't live on motivation. He lives by vow. His discipline is not noise, it is ritual. It's the silent agreement between his soul and his future. And because he has grieved the man he used to be, he no longer needs to prove anything. He simply walks. He simply builds, in stillness, with power. But that kind of discipline only comes after the descent, after the shadow has been met, after the soul fragmentation has been acknowledged. The king cannot return until the ashes are cleared, until the old throne is dismantled. That's why your routines kept failing. They were built by a man who hadn't yet released the past. Discipline without death is performance. Discipline after grief is presence. Real, rooted, radiant. And that presence will not just change your habits, it will change how time moves through you. No more chaos, no more hesitation, just the quiet certainty of a man who has returned to himself. So now ask yourself, are you ready to bury him? The version of you who kept disappearing every time life demanded more. The one who called it burnout, but really it was fear of rising, of leading, of failing. That man is tired. He's been holding your fire for too long. Let him rest and let yourself rise. Because once you do, the world around you begins to bend, not out of force, but out of recognition. You no longer need to be seen. You've already seen yourself. And in that seeing, in that silence, something ancient returns, something sovereign, something whole, and that's where we end this descent, on the edge of rebirth. But the journey isn't over. Now that the fracture is visible, now that the mask has been removed, what comes next is even more powerful. Because if discipline is how you walk, and identity is who walks, then time is where it happens. In the next part of this path, we'll talk about time, not as a calendar, but as a mirror. A mirror that reflects back exactly what you've become. If you haven't already, scroll to the first comment below. I've linked resources to help you rebuild your ritual. And in the comments, tell me, who are you finally ready to become? You've reached the crossroads. You now know the hidden truth behind why discipline felt so impossible. It's not something you force, it's something you integrate. You've recognized that your struggle was never laziness, but the spiritual wound of fragmentation. But knowing isn't enough, you must act. Right now, make a silent vow. No more betraying yourself. No more postponing the life you were meant to live. Every day you choose discipline over distraction, presence over avoidance. You heal another fracture in your soul. So ask yourself honestly, what identity have you been clinging to that's holding you back? Who are you finally ready to let go of, and who are you ready to become? Don't leave this insight trapped in theory. Make it real. Drop a comment below, sharing the one step you'll take today to reclaim your power. Remember, transformation is not about massive leaps. It's about quiet, relentless commitment. Your life changes the moment your identity shifts from someone who tries to someone who simply is. And if you're committed to deepening this journey, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because true discipline isn't found, it's remembered. Check the first pinned comment below for resources carefully selected to anchor your transformation. It's time to rewrite your story, one conscious choice at a time. The disciplined, sovereign man you seek is not out there. He's already inside, waiting patiently for you to return home.